Joining us now, Dr. Vanessa Neumann. She's becoming a regular on our show. She's also the president of Asymmetrica, and she is really an authority on South America. She's also been involved for a very long time as a sub-chair at the High-Level Risk Forum Task Force on charting the illicit trade at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Dr. Neumann, it's great to have you back.
Great. Thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be on with you guys.
Dr. Neumann, what is going on in Venezuela right now? You've got the U.S. weighing in, saying that this election was not particularly on the up and up. We're talking about, I guess, the State Department going to the Organization of Central American States and saying that Venezuela should get kicked out. What's going on?
Oh, well, America and the Trump administration has shown great leadership on this issue of Venezuela. You know, Venezuelans in general feel a bit, feel a lot let down, a lot betrayed by that they under the Obama administration. They knew that this was a criminal regime that was heavily involved in drug trafficking, heavily involved in supporting terrorism. They had all the information, and then they dropped it in order to sign the nuclear deal with Iran. So, and then what happened is, in dropping that and not pursuing actions against the facilitators of Iran in Venezuela, this dictatorship, this drug trafficking dictatorship, just grew and grew and grew into a horrible monster. And now you have, the 30 million people, who can't get out from under this. And the election was, and you have an exodus. You have a human migration that's almost as big as Syria. It's not quite there yet, but almost. It's the worst the Western Hemisphere has ever seen. And so the Trump administration has reversed course from Obama and been very aggressive and shown great leadership in terms of sanctioning them and also using this OAS, which is here in D.C., and it's considered this body that's like where all the countries in the Western Hemisphere are equals. They all have one vote. So it's not a forum where the U.S. outweighs them, which means that it's easier for Latin Americans to feel a little bit less threatened because you have it's like a complicated relationship with the U.S. So, and even they have started to turn. So this May 20th election was just an absolute joke. I mean, it was rigged. The major political leaders are in prison. Several of them have been tortured. One of them is actually a friend of mine, has lost most of his eyesight, won't speak anymore because the torture was so bad. And finally, also the leader Almagro and other countries in the region, like Chile, the OAS came out with a report of 8,500 people that the Maduro regime has killed, extrajudicial killings that they've murdered, 12,000 people in prison for without due process, and the rest of the hemisphere said, this is terrible. We're going to, they need to be kicked out of this organization that's supposed to be upholding democracy. This country is not a democracy. So it's a combination of the rest of the region waking up, but also pushed by a very, pro-free trade, pro-capitalism and pro-democracy Trump administration.
So what happens now? I mean, how do we go forward here with, of course, our relationship with Venezuela, the Venezuelan people? They do have, I guess you could say, a duly elected regime, even though they were saying the elections were not fair. I mean, how does the U.S. go forward now? What would be your recommendation?
Well, actually, they're not fairly elected, and that was the decision made on the 5th, the day before yesterday. They had a vote, and it was 19 countries in favor, of a statement that the election May 20th was just not fair at all. In other words, very few people voted. The votes were stolen. There was no oversight. It was a joke. I mean, don't forget, you have elections in Cuba. Would you call Cuba a democracy? I mean, it's the same. You can vote as long as you vote for one party.
Right.
So anyway, so it's the same thing. So now what's going to happen is, nobody really knows what happens next. The Venezuelans really kind of need to stand up for themselves and sort of save themselves. The problem is that they've had about 29 or possibly even 30 minor coup attempts by the military so far, but they keep intercepting them because you got the Russians in there and you got the Cubans, intelligence, and they imprison the military. But they're going to run out. They're going to run out soon enough, and they're isolated. Nobody will do business with these guys. They're out of money. They're almost out of friends. They only have 3 other countries in the hemisphere that voted with them. And they want to, hopefully after this break, they'll come back into the fold, into a friendship with the U.S. again. I think the Venezuelan people are ready for that.
So do you see the government collapsing? Do you see other countries being involved in regime change? Do you see riots? Look in your crystal ball, Vanessa Neumann. What do you see?
Oh my God, I don't know. I need a crystal ball, John. I think you kind of see a confluence of all of it. The problem with riots is people did riot before and they didn't really see change, and you got a lot of murders. The security forces came out into the street and just shot people randomly, and that's in the report, in the OAS report. Thousands of them. So over 8,500. So they think. So you also the regime is imploding. There's so many plots within it, and I think what they're trying to do is some factions of the regime are trying to say, look, dude, our families can't eat either. These are my neighbors who are suffering. It's time for you to get on a plane and get out of here and let us all get back to, rebuilding the country. So there's a lot of that pressure. The other scenario is other countries like Colombia, which, was basically helped a lot by the U.S. when you had all the big bad, the drug cartels and the FARC, the Marxist guerrillas. They're going to have a right-wing president elected in June. I'd be shocked if the left-wing one won. It just, the numbers don't add up. I think it's going to be the right-wing guy. And he's got people pouring over the border, and he just joined NATO. So with a country that just joined NATO and a humanitarian crisis pouring over its borders, it's feasible that the neighbors like Brazil and Colombia might take action and then support something from the inside. I think the United States can't touch it because it's just too toxic for them.
Right. So, I don't think we should get involved in, Venezuela regime change or any regime change for that matter.
Right.
I'm not in favor of that. But, boy, you look at the fall, Vanessa Neumann, of Venezuela in such a relatively short period of time. It wasn't that long ago where they were a very prosperous, very rich country, even with Chavez there, with the oil that they had, the income off that, before the oil prices collapsed globally. But, in a very short period of time, they've gone from a very prosperous, rich company to now a complete economic catastrophe where people can't buy
it's a catastrophe.
Food.
It's a catastrophe. It's a huge humanitarian crisis. You have something like 70% of the people have dropped 20 pounds because they can't find enough food to eat. People they can't get on a bus to go to work. They get onto animal transportation. When I was originally born there. My mom's American, but I was born there and I spent the first few years of my life there. Before I moved here and came to school here and all of that. And they, you used to have the Concorde flew from Paris to Caracas, and you had all the oil companies and it was full of Americans because of the oil, and then you had English language newspapers because you had so many business people. And now it's bordering on Somalia. It's a horrible situation. So, but you had signs of the crisis as early on as 2013. What happened is we had people from Venezuela come to Washington, D.C. and talk to some of the people in D.C. and in 2013 and say, look, people aren't getting enough food. There isn't enough money. These are the signs of the crisis. And D.C. lawmakers and policymakers said, no, you're crazy. You're radical. We're not seeing this. And now we're seeing it. And it was all the same signs. But now the money's run out. So now it's was it one of the great sort of world's investors said, when the tide goes out, when the financial tide goes out, you can tell who's wearing a swimming suit and who isn't.
Right.
Who's wearing a
exactly.
Well,
exactly.
They weren't. They gave away all the money, and then they stole the money. When they had the money with all the oil prices high, they gave it away into like social projects to buy votes. They gave it away to other countries to prop up socialist and anti-American regimes, and then they stole just hundreds of billions, hundreds of millions into the billions of it in their personal bank accounts. And now this is what happened. I mean, it's a horror story.
The U.S. has called for the Organization of American States, the OAS, and just kicking Venezuela, kicking them out. What does that solve?
Well, you see, that's a very good question. You hit the nail on the head with that one, because a lot of Venezuelans are like, I don't care, man. I can't feed my kids. They have children. My kid just died from a lack of medicine or a lack of food. What do I care about what goes on in Washington, D.C. with the OAS? But what it does is it solves, it's one more step that they really care about, and it's really about other countries in the region, showing that this is not a democracy, that this country is not a legitimate regime. And therefore, it cuts off financial, so other countries like Russia and China, if they keep lending it money, they're just propping up a criminal dictatorship. It also opens the path for military intervention. It's an invitation for people from within, for those military who want to get rid of Maduro, to do so. It gives a sort of a stamp of approval that we agree this is not legitimate. You have something else at the OAS, which nobody ever talks about. Venezuela has a Supreme Court that's in exile. And it's in exile because the regime tried to murder them. And these were the Supreme Court judges appointed by their by their own by the right people, by the National Assembly that was elected in 2013. The regime said, we don't want you, we're appointing a whole new Supreme Court. So you have a parallel government, and they're operating out of the OAS. And they've said that the president isn't legitimate. So what they're setting up is a struggle between, invitations to the rest of the world to cut off money and to help support the Venezuelan people to rise up out from under this dictatorship. And that's what's important about it, because it's the other countries in the region saying, we agree, these people need to get out.
So Vanessa Neumann, president of Asymmetrical, expert on South America. So when you're saying rise up against the government, are you talking about a revolution? What are you talking about?
Well, we don't really know. I mean, as I said, you have had so many attempts, even from within the military in Venezuela, to rise up and arrest some of the people at the top. Because you have factions, right? Not everybody's even within the military, which is basically now a giant criminal organization. You have some people who don't agree and aren't happy, and they want these guys out. So they have tried to. They will probably continue to rise up, and probably to get support and to get from within the people, from within Venezuela, and to rise up in some sort of civil military partnership. Venezuela did this once before. They did this in 1958. They got rid of another military dictatorship. The people were tired of the repression, tired of the torture. They rose up. They started climbing the walls of the presidential palace, literally, took to the streets. And the military said, we're not going to shoot these people. It's time for you to get on a plane. Sir. They came into the office, grabbed the president, and shoved him on a plane. And democracy was restored after a transition. I think that's what they're hoping will happen.
It's kind of a silent coup. I'm out of time. I got to go. I want to thank Vanessa Neumann for being with us. Vanessa, people want more info on you. Where do they go?
Oh, they go to www.asymmetrica.net or my Twitter handle at Vanessa Neumann, Neumann. So you can find me online. Thank you.